So thanks for joining us, Dr. Advait Sarkar. You're here today to talk about your keynote paper that you're going to be giving at EuSpRIG 2024. The title of the paper is Generative AI's Critical Risk to Spreadsheets. And I understand that you're associated with Cambridge University, Microsoft Research, and UCL. Could you tell us a bit about what motivated your paper and what's in your paper?
Yes, definitely. So the motivation of the paper was kind of a two-part story. The first part was an earlier paper that I'd written in 2023. I'd been taking a look at research on generative AI and different domains in programming, in visual art, in creative writing. And a picture that seemed to emerge was that people were spending less time physically producing stuff, like physically typing out words on the page, and spending more time evaluating what AI was doing, generating, editing AI-generated work. And so we call this kind of a move to critical integration, the idea that people were thinking critically about AI output and how to use it in the workflow. And this was a kind of new way of doing knowledge work. So that was in 2023. However, subsequently, as Gen AI is adopted by larger and larger sections of the working population and more and more contexts, we see a rather different kind of studies, a set of studies emerge, which shows something slightly different. It's not that people are evaluating the AI output at all, but rather there's a strong tendency to just accept whatever it generates at face value. And the consequence of this is that a lot of knowledge work starts looking the same. So there's a study of BCG consultants who use ChatGPT to do consultancy reports. And they found that the consultants who use ChatGPT produced substantially similar reports to each other than the people who didn't use ChatGPT. And this kind of what we call a mechanized convergence effect, it kind of has been found not only in people writing reports, but it's also in other examples, people who are doing online search, people who are doing creative writing, or people who are doing ideation, and even people who are writing code. Basically, when you use generative AI, your work starts to look like everybody else's. And what that signaled to us is there is some sort of silent crisis of intentionality, of people slowly just being nudged into a world where they don't engage deeply with the things that they're producing. They become one step removed from the work that they do and don't get a chance to or have the habit of engaging critically with the things that they're producing. And therein lies the motivation for our line of research.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating that you've drawn from lots of different directions. I find that particularly interesting. But also that, yeah, I mean, that kind of tendency for everyone's work to start looking the same is very interesting. In terms of the techniques that are in your paper, what could you tell us about those?
So we draw basically from education research as our best starting point. And educators have been thinking a very long time about how to get students to learn how to think more critically. And one of the sort of most compelling and simplest kinds of intervention is best exemplified by, I think, the work of the researcher Gabriel Salomon, who very charmingly called his work AI in reverse. But this was in the 80s. So AI meant something very different then, but it's quite prescient now. And the approach basically was, while students are reading, for instance, let's just from time to time provoke them by using a question. So these could be called sort of metacognitive guiding questions, to use a few $10 words. But it's sort of like, while you're reading some text, it could be something in your textbook, it could be an article, from time to time, a message appears that says, what kind of image have I created from the text? Or what do I understand so far? Or what does the title of this section tell me about what's going to come in the rest of the section? So these kinds of questions basically cause a kind of kickstart a kind of cognitive engagement process that prompts learners to think carefully about what they're reading. And in a nutshell, Salomon's research found that even something as simple as this can vastly improve reading comprehension. So we're taking a page out of that book and saying, okay, while people are having a conversation with ChatGPT, with Copilot, with whatever your AI tool is, having a air quotes conversation to try and get some work done, can we provide provocations or critiques at appropriate junctions to prompt people to think more critically about what they're doing? So that is the basic approach we're taking. It's not an approach we've invented, but we think it's we're kind of the first to try and apply it in the age of generative AI tools. And there's not necessarily, we don't think necessarily that like just taking a strategy that has worked well in education is going to work well by default in knowledge work, because of course the setting is completely different. People are not who are trying to get their work done are not in a learning setting. They have different incentives, they have different constraints. So this is what we think of this as a starting point, that it's worked well in education. Let's try it in knowledge work, and then through a user-centered research, figure out, is this going to work? If not, how can we kind of adopt the same idea but manifest it in a more appropriate way?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to approach it. Having taught with, GPT with my students in various different ways, I often find myself coming back to, or I think of it as coming back to kind of old school techniques, is how I would think of it, in terms of, say, verifying information. In order to, be sure about what the output is, whether it's reliable or whether, there's the chance that it might be a hallucination. So hearing these things is really interesting. And I think it's also quite interesting how a tool like generative AI, I think, inspires us perhaps to think differently about how we can then use that tool. It's like someone dropping it on your front door, and I suppose you gradually working out how to use this tool, and that may well include how we think about it, the process that goes into planning what you're going to do before you do it. And that I think is really interesting, because there's a great parallel between generative AI and spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are that, very flexible tool that can be used for a variety of things. The tendency there is to dive straight in, and to produce something and get the results, and then to say, there we go, that's done. I think the situation you're describing with generative AI is sort of similar, really, where you have that great accessibility to generate different things. And then people tend to trust the output fairly blindly. So having techniques like the one you've described, I think, are a really important step in making the most out of what we have in terms of generative AI, because it is very powerful. Yeah, absolutely. Really exciting stuff. Really looking forward to your chat.
Yeah, it's I really look forward to the opportunity to discuss this with all of the great folks at EuSpRIG.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on. That's perfect, and we'll see you in July in London.
See you soon.
Thank you.